Good evening, everybody, and welcome to my lecture recital presentation. My project is titled Embodiment and Ascension, the compositional development and personification of Dr. Michael Tunnell and the solo trumpet works of Dr. Steve Rouse. Today, I'll be performing two works by American composer Steve Rouse titled The Avatar and Nevolution. In tandem with studying these pieces and Dr. Rouse's website, I also gathered a substantial amount of information from two interviews with the composer himself. All instances and quotes by Dr. Rouse derived from our meetings, unless specifically stated otherwise. As we begin, let's discuss the goal of my presentation. This project will connect the instrumental solos of Steve Rouse with the conventions of Campbell's Hero's Journey and the Hindu Avatar cycle relative to his friendship with trumpeter Michael Tunnell. Now, before we speak about the music, let me explain the Hero's Journey and the Avatar cycle. Joseph Campbell was one of the foremost literary scholars of his time. He published many books and studies comparing patterns and the legends and lore of multiple cultures, ranging from the ancient Greeks to indigenous Americans to secluded African tribespeople. The quote displayed on the screen derives from a private conversation between Campbell and former United States Press Secretary Bill Moyers. Quote, "The ultimate aim of the quest must be neither release nor ecstasy for oneself, but the wisdom and the power to serve others," end quote. Moyers was fascinated with Campbell's ideas, so much so that he interviewed Campbell for a recorded documentary series aired by PBS in 1988. Now, the year 1988 does bear significance later in this project, so just remember that year for later. Also displayed on the screen is an Om symbol, a cross, and a lightsaber. These symbols of Hinduism, Christianity, and, yes, Star Wars, are tropes that Campbell identified as significant archetypes in the hero's journey. So here's a visual representation of Campbell's template for the archetypal hero. Campbell originally listed 17 aspects of the hero's journey, but he categorized them into three broad sections: the departure, initiation, and return. The departure begins with a call to adventure and leads into the initiation by crossing the threshold into the unknown. From the unknown, the hero experiences trials and tribulations before falling into what Campbell calls the abyss, or the spiritual low point. The hero then rises and is transfigured before crossing the second threshold, this time back into the known world. This represents the return stage of the journey as the hero becomes victorious, the enlightened master of two worlds. According to Hindu legend, avatars were embodiments of the god Vishnu that were reincarnated into the world to combat forces of evil. Legend states that there have been 9 avatars so far, and a 10th will eventually appear to rid the world of evil once and for all. The cycle itself directly parallels the departure, initiation, return trope, but is more accurately ascribed as birth, struggle, and enlightenment or ascension. Some additional aspects of Campbell's journey include supernatural assistance, a mentor figure, and various helpers. Some popular examples of this template include Star Wars, Lord of the Rings, and a plethora of comic book characters. Moving ahead, I now want to take some time to introduce Dr. Steve Rouse. He was born in Moss Point, Mississippi in 1953. He and his family lived in the nearby town of Escatawpa, but moved back to Moss Point when Rouse was 6 years old. Rouse was drawn to Beethoven's symphonies in his youth, and he also had a great interest in psychology and philosophy, stating that he, quote, read as much Jung as he could, end quote. When he got to middle school, he decided to join the band, where he was instructed by Larry McWilliams. McWilliams taught Rouse how to play multiple instruments and eventually paved the path for Rouse to play bassoon with the Gulf Coast Symphony, a local orchestra. Dr. Rouse credits McWilliams' guidance and mentorship for inspiring him to pursue a career in music. In college, he developed an affinity for the works of Elliott Carter, Pierre Boulez, and Luciano Berry, which later influenced his compositions. Rouse earned his Bachelor of Music degree from the University of Southern Mississippi before earning his master's and doctorate at the University of Michigan at Ann Arbor. Following his doctoral studies, Rouse taught for 1 year at the University of Utah before winning the Rome Prize from the American Academy in Rome in 1987. Rouse considers this honor to be a significant milestone in his life, as it allowed him to study abroad in Rome for a year. Dr. Rouse then joined the faculty at the University of Louisville in 1988, and he still teaches composition there to this day. Now, reflecting on the visual of Campbell's cycle shown earlier, here's a visual representation of the beginning of Rouse's epic journey. Larry McWilliams acts as the mentor figure, even though he arrives in Rouse's story before the call to adventure. And the call to adventure itself I identified as Rouse's appointment to Louisville in 1988. Speaking of 1988, the significant year that I mentioned earlier, another very important musician joined the faculty that same year. And that musician is trumpeter Dr. Michael Tunnell. Tunnell earned his master's degree from Louisville a decade before his appointment, replacing his former teacher, Leon Rapier. Dr. Tunnell was a major proponent of new music, especially for corno di caccia, which is a unique brass instrument that Tunnell was well known for. He recorded multiple records with his wife and pianist, Mimi Tunnell, shown here at the right of the screen. Unfortunately, Dr. Tunnell passed away from cancer in 2014. Dr. Rouse stated that Tunnell was the second U of L faculty member to approach him for a new composition. Now let me remind you that this request occurred around the same time that PBS was airing the Campbell-Moyers interviews, which inspired Rouse as he began his new composition for his colleague. That composition eventually became The Avatar. The Avatar represents the departure phase of Rouse's journey. Its three movements are titled Nativity, Enigma-Release, and Rebirth, as shown on the screen. Dr. Rouse began working on the Avatar over the Christmas holiday of 1989 upon a combination of Tunnell's request for a new piece. Originally just a standalone flourish for piccolo trumpet commemorating the Christmas season, Dr. Rouse completed what eventually became the first movement of the piece, titled Nativity, in 1990. The piece was then debuted by Michael and Mimi Tunnell at the Potsdam New Music Festival that February. Following the debut of Nativity, Tunnell urged Rouse to expand upon the piece and create a full three-movement sonata. Not long afterwards, Rouse received a commission from the League of Composers of the International Society of Contemporary Music. This offered Rouse a perfect opportunity to follow Tunnell's suggestion and expand Nativity into a multi-movement work. Influenced from the recently released PBS special of Joseph Campbell and Bill Moyers, Rouse centered the piece around the theme of the cycle, and he expanded the story of the Avatar from birth to struggle, enlightenment, and ascension. Per the ISCM commission, the completed sonata was debuted by Raymond Mace at the International Society of Contemporary Music on May 9, 1991 in New York City, and then later recorded on Mace's album Trumpet in Our Time. Jeffrey Silberschlag, a mutual friend of Rouse's, performed an arrangement of Enigma-Release, the second movement of the piece, for flugelhorn and string orchestra with the Seattle Symphony Orchestra in 1994, conducted by Gerard Schwartz. On his website, Rouse indicates several potential personifications of the Avatar. First, Rouse explains the Hindu doctrine of avatars as explained previously in this project. Rouse also likens the cycle to Buddhist monks in their search for enlightenment, struggle, and awakening to their second birth. Yet another comparison is the human life cycle depicting birth, struggle, and self-actualization or transfiguration. However, a more familiar interpretation of this piece is the life of Christ, from birth, life, and resurrection. The first movement, Nativity, is a bright, sprightly movement with whirring scales, nimble leaps, and pensive phrases of sustained notes performed on piccolo trumpet. The movement embodies the youthful origins of the Avatar and the departure phase of the cycle. While only about 2 minutes in length, this movement remains vibrant, constantly challenging the soloist's technique, articulation, flexibility, and range. When speaking about the symbolism of the instrumentation, Rouse stated, quote, "I never really thought about the symbolism, but because I was using piccolo trumpet, it had this sort of small quality to me. It was natural to me. I never actually thought of it as a baby, but I must have thought of it as some kind of birth because I titled it Nativity," end quote. The excerpt shown above marks the primary theme starting at measure 54. This theme is later reprised in the third movement. Enigma-Release is the second movement of the Avatar and is performed on flugelhorn. Marked by sustained notes moving in intricately specified rhythms, the movement's greatest challenge is its coordination between the soloist and the accompanist. Dynamically, the soloist begins at niente and weaves in and out of silence before charging in a seismic swell to a marked triple forte in the middle of the movement, the loudest dynamic written in the entire piece. When discussing the instrumentation of this movement, Rouse stated he wanted the darker, seemingly brooding color of the flugelhorn to represent the period of strife in the Avatar's journey. Ironically, the same instrument is used in the second movement of Nevolution, the next piece we will talk about, for a very much different reason. The movement is centered largely around the interval of a major second. Rouse also specified that his inspiration behind that particular interval was from a dream that he had while writing this movement. Rouse describes this as his fish dream, and in this fish dream, he envisions himself walking through a field of flowers. Each flower had a lid like a Venus flytrap that opened up as he walked past, and inside each bowl, a fish was swimming in clear liquid that rose to the surface and sang a major second on an ah syllable. Since the flowers and fish all varied in size, there are multiple starting pitches and speeds of these major seconds, sometimes sounding quarter steps apart. Regarding the avatar, that major second motif is a central idea in Enigma-Release. In addition to the dream's compositional influence, the symbolism of the fish itself also has many archetypal applications. For example, this fish symbol is commonly associated with Christianity and Jesus Christ. Additionally, in Hindu legend, MacPhail, who is the first of the avatars, is frequently depicted as a fish, such as in the picture in the bottom left corner. Now let's take a closer look at that major second motif as it appears in Enigma-Release. So this slide shows the application of the fish dream major second in the second movement. I highlighted the first two iterations of the movement from the solo part in the graphic above. This motive does, however, return at multiple points throughout the movement. The third and final movement of the piece is titled Rebirth, which is played on B-flat trumpet by merit of the instrument's characteristic strength and maturity. This movement, the most technically demanding of the three, is an energetic rush of speedy scales, blazing trills, and incrementally accelerating rhythms. This, while navigating the rapidly changing meters, requires great skill by both the soloist and the accompanist. As the movement progresses, it eventually reprises a theme from the first movement, before a thudding low A-flat begins a half-valve glissando that rises to a written high A-flat at a quadruple piano dynamic, an effect that symbolizes the ascension and rebirth of the avatar. I highlighted that ascension motif here at the top of the screen. I also included the same excerpt that I showed from the first movement and the reprise of it in the third. Now, before I perform this piece, let's revisit our visual of Dr. Rouse's journey so far. The fish dream acts as the supernatural aid, and Rouse crosses the threshold into the unknown with a combination of Tunnell's request and the ISCM commission of the avatar. Finally, Rouse's first helper in this journey is Dr. Tunnell. Now give me just a moment, I'm going to go gather Professor MacPhail and we will begin our performance of the avatar. elliptical. It's okay. Whew. Okay. Moving on. Nearly 2 decades after the premiere of The Avatar, Tunnell approached Rouse to write him another piece, this time for corno da caccia. The corno is a very obscure brass instrument shown here on the screen. Now, as you can see, it looks very much like a French horn, but only about half the size. Regarding Campbell's cycle, the corno is equivalent to a special amulet or a talisman given from the helper to the hero to assist them on their journey. Tunnell famously advocated for the instrument, and he gathered several original compositions to record an album of corno music. Rouse agreed, and he composed Nevolution in December of 2010. He claimed that the inspiration for this piece was the concept of evolution, and he integrated works from a variety of scientific and musical minds within this piece. While it was an exciting time for Rouse and Tunnell, it also was a period of struggle for the two. Dr. Tunnell underwent a double knee replacement, and following the operation, he developed an odd rash on his knee that slowly developed into a rare cancer. Despite his diagnosis, Tunnell continued to teach, perform, and record for his upcoming album. Rouse stated that he, along with most others, expected Tunnell to make a full recovery. Sadly, Tunnell's health continued to deteriorate, forcing him into hospice care. Tunnell's album, Nevolution, was released posthumously in 2015, following his death on December 19th, 2014. Now let's discuss each of the movements of Nevolution, starting with the first, Echo Migration. The movement is a quick-paced gallop with spans of varying rhythmic passages, wide intervals, and challenging articulation patterns. Rouse describes this movement as reminiscent of works by Dutch artist M.C. Escher, specifically crediting Water and Sky 1 on his website. He connects the movement to the drawing due to how the pulse of the movement constantly shifts. He says that the listeners know that it's changing, but can't decipher exactly where or when it does. Let me also note that while Nevolution was originally written for corno, Rouse states that he had both corno and trumpet in mind while he was composing the piece. He added that, to his knowledge, there has not been a performance of Nevolution on anything other than corno, meaning that my performance could possibly be a premiere of the piece on an alternate instrumentation. After speaking with Dr. Rouse, he gave me license to perform this movement on cornet, given its conical construction and historical application. Now let's move to the second movement, Starquiet. This movement, subtitled A Lullaby, is compositionally sophisticated, yet sonically simple. Characterized by long notes, very large intervals, and introverted dynamics, Rouse describes the soloist as singing a song without words. Starquiet depicts a panoramic shot of a clear night sky, with the piano symbolizing protrusions of light from the stars. He also adds that the movement portrays the juxtaposition of the stars appearing static even though they are always moving. Additionally, Rouse told me that Mimi Tunnell played the recording of Starquiet that she and her husband recorded together at Michael's funeral. Per instruction of the score, I'll be performing this movement on flugelhorn. And finally, the third movement, Morphic Resonance, is a tribute to the biological studies of Rupert Sheldrake. Rouse quickly explained Sheldrake's theory of morphic resonance to me as, quote, his theory is that there is a kind of field that surrounds all life. In fact, it surrounds all non-life, and this field has a memory that informs direction and shape of development, end quote. For example, a bone cell knows to become a bone cell, and a brain cell knows to become a brain cell. An interesting convention Rouse employs with this movement is his utilization of the harmonic series. Early trumpets were restricted to notes that naturally existed within the harmonic series and could not achieve chromaticism due to their lack of vowels. Rouse employed this convention of early trumpet compositions with a modern application. Rouse achieves this by having the soloist use various vowel combinations to shift between different harmonic series by altering the overall length of the horn. To clarify, here's a portion of the solo part to Morphic Resonance. The various trios of numbers circled in red indicate which vowels to depress in order to transition between different harmonic series. To demonstrate this, I will use this horn. This is a corno da caccia, but this specific instrument is a very, very special corno, because this was the corno da caccia that belonged to Mike Tunnell himself. And I'm extremely lucky to have this in my possession, courtesy of my friend, Dr. Don Johnson, and I now will demonstrate this excerpt using Dr. Tunnell's corno. Now, before I perform Nevolution, let's review where we are in terms of Rouse's journey. This piece, along with Tunnell's diagnosis and failing health, align with the road of trials. I also noted that the corno represents an amulet given from Tunnell to Rouse as marked on the screen. Tunnell's death represents the abyss and the beginning of Rouse's transformation as seen at the bottom of the graphic. Now give me just another moment to go grab Professor MacPhail and we will begin our performance of Nevolution. Nevolution were connected to each other, he stated that there was, quote, a reverberation of the avatar in Nevolution, end quote. He then told me of a third piece that acts as a cousin to the other two, and that piece is Tunnell's Vision for horn and piano. Tunnell's Vision was a request by Bruce Heim, the horn professor at Louisville. He was longtime friends with both Rouse and Tunnell. In fact, Heim and Tunnell performed together for years with the Sonus Brass Quintet and taught together at the University of Louisville. In 2019, Heim asked Rouse to write him a piece to honor the memory of their deceased friend. Rouse stated in our interview together that he had always wanted to write a commemorative piece for Dr. Tunnell since he passed, and he even wrote a few sketches of a trumpet solo. But Heim's request was the perfect avenue to flesh out a true elegy. The compositional structure of this piece closely resembled movements of both the Avatar and Nevolution. However, Rouse wrote the third movement of the piece as the slower, more introverted movement instead of the traditionally slow second movement. Rouse chose to do this to end the piece in a solemn tone to commemorate Tunnell's death. The first movement, Ancient Calls, is a modern spin on archaic horn calls and is centered largely around perfect fifths. The use of perfect intervals is very similar to both Nativity and Morphic Resonance, which utilize perfect intervals for the same purpose. The second movement, Tarantula, is a technically challenging take on the traditional tarantella dance with a constantly shifting pulse and multiple time signatures, much like Rebirth and Echo Migration. And finally, the third movement is Elegy from Michael, which employs many of the same fading techniques as Enigma-Release and Starquiet. Rouse stated that many of his sketches could not achieve the proper tone colors despite him trying, quote, a gazillion different keys, end quote. But switching from trumpet to horn allowed him to compose the movement with the proper tone colors he was searching for. This is the program notes from the score of Tunnell's Vision. Rouse says, quote, Tunnell's Vision honors Mike's lifelong commitment to encouraging, commissioning, recording, promoting, and performing new compositions by living composers. Because of Mike's passion for new compositions, dozens of works for his instrument and related combinations exist today. Mike had an extraordinary commitment to excellence and bringing to life composers' visions of their music. His was truly a collaborative spirit. I will forever be grateful to Mike and his wife and pianist partner, Mimi, for their support, appreciation, and encouragement. I miss him today, and I'm sure I always will, end quote. As you can see, Rouse notes Tunnell's dedication to new works and his commitment to excellence. This piece immortalizes and transfigures Dr. Tunnell while also signifying the crossing of the return threshold back to the known world and the ascension phase of the Avatar cycle. Here's a performance of Elegy for Michael featuring Bruce Heim on horn and Christopher Brody on piano. Now, at long last, we have finally arrived to the end of our journey together. As you can see, Bruce Heim enters as another helper. Rouse's preliminary sketches mark his transition to the return, and the composition of Tunnell's vision is the return itself. Rouse's journey is now over, as is this project. Before we go, let me run through the bibliography real quick. And I also have a few important acknowledgments that I'd like to make. So, as we've talked about at length today, no journey is complete without a series of mentors and helpers, and I have been beyond lucky to have had a number of people filling those roles. And first and foremost, this project would not be possible if it wasn't for my primary advisor, Dr. Elizabeth Hoover. All the work that you've done with me, not just this semester, but my entire 2 years here at Miami, I am indebted to you. Thank you so much. I hope to repay you someday. And on a similar note, my performance of these pieces would have been laughable if it wasn't for the 2 years of study that I had with the incredible Mr. Doug Lindsay. If I heard a recording of myself performing this 2 years ago, I would have said there's no way that that could be me. And I owe it to Mr. Lindsay for kicking my butt enough and showing me all the tools, giving me all the tools necessary to succeed. So thank you, Mr. Lindsay. Additionally, I'd like to thank Dr. Claire Bogue for rounding out the final third of my committee. Unfortunately, she couldn't be here with us today, but your knowledge that you gave to me about looking deeper into music, looking beyond the notes whenever I'm analyzing music and finding that treasure at the bottom of the sea, as you like to say in our graduate analysis class. Thank you, Dr. Bogue. I'd also like to acknowledge, again, Professor Heather MacPhail. I think she may have left already, but that's a lot of notes. There's a lot of notes that she was responsible for, and she did an excellent, excellent job. So I'd like to publicly thank her and acknowledge her for her efforts to this project. Also, this project simply would not exist if it wasn't for the professionalism and cooperation and personability for Dr. Steve Rouse. Unfortunately, he also could not be here today. He's teaching back down at Louisville, and I hope that this project has done your music justice, and I hope that this helps bring awareness to these incredible works that you have written for us. Thank you for everything you've done for me, Dr. Rouse. The next two people are actually people that I have never met in person or otherwise, and that is Michael and Mimi Tunnell. I never was lucky enough to meet Dr. Tunnell before his passing, but I can't help but feel some kind of connection to him through this project, through playing his instrument that meant so much to him. And perhaps he was my supernatural assistance throughout this project for me. Thank you, Michael and Mimi Tunnell, for your contributions to the trumpet repertoire, to the repertoire of music in general, your teachings. Thank you for everything. And last, I'd like to acknowledge Dr. Don Johnson for providing me with Dr. Tunnell's corno. It really did help elevate this project to a place I didn't think it could go. I also want to give a huge thank you to all my friends and family, my parents, my sister, my friends here in Oxford, back in Texas, wherever you may be. Thank you for your support. I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for your contribution. As Campbell likes to say, follow your bliss, be good to yourselves, be good to each other. Thank you so much.